I'm speaking to you with the full authority of Brigade Command, the Ulster Volunteer Force. The Ulster Volunteer Force were the first organisation on the stage, to use your term.
I often wonder what David Irvine would say and would think today. What is their role? What's their purpose?
There's no enemy in the political sense. There's no enemy in terms of republicanism, and there's no political agenda.
UVF can't ride two horses. It's make our mind up time, and they have to make our minds up.
We will be, if at any stage in the future leaving the stage, we will be the final organisation to do that.
Those UVF words spoken from behind a balaclava 5 years ago are just as relevant today. Of course, there have been many other words before and since, typed and handwritten, promises made and broken, orders given and disobeyed. An organisation supposed to have assumed a non-military civilianised role is up on its stage, and there are still questions about war and peace. For years, as a commissioner with the IMC, Lord Alderdice studied the activities and trends within the UVF.
Is it unable or unwilling, do you think, to leave the stage?
I think now the people who are key are unwilling. There were those who got the message, who understood, and I think who made an attempt to deliver the UVF and indeed the UDA. But they really weren't able to be very successful. They weren't able to get political support in their own community. And they themselves seemed to find it difficult to get a strategy that would really work. On the other hand, there were people who were gaining personally out of crime, out of drugs, out of extortion, out of criminal activity. And there are some also who know that their criminal past may well catch up with them.
Peter Sheridan is a former Assistant Chief Constable who would have read the intelligence assessments on the UVF. He's now Chief Executive of Cooperation Ireland and wonders, with the IRA war over, why the UVF hasn't gone away.
The enemy's gone off the stage, so it can't be about the enemy, so it has to be about what they can get within their own community and how they control that community.
Is it about self-interest and self-gain, do you think?
Well, I imagine some of it has to be about self-interest and self-gain.
Because of the attack it organised on the streets of the Short Strand a little over a fortnight ago, the UVF is now under a political and a security spotlight. Men in hoods wearing surgical gloves and directed by UVF leaders were involved in a clear breach of ceasefire and the contradiction of an endgame statement issued more than 4 years ago. In the fallout, the political leaders of loyalism won't speak, lost for words, left speechless by the actions of those who ordered the attack and by those who've acquiesced in it.
If it's difficult for the politicians who are associated and aligned around the UVF to speak out, how much more difficult it is for ordinary people who live in that area to speak out?
John Graham is the UVF's most senior leader, a man I've met many times, and this Sunday newspaper photograph of the secretive paramilitary brigadier is one of the very few in existence. Up to this point, Graham hasn't moved to distance the organisation from what happened in East Belfast, and that suggests it wasn't a maverick attack, but something that has wider support and implications. This evening I called his mobile number to ask if the attack on the Short Strand was sanctioned at the highest level. There was no reply and no opportunity to ask that question. In all that has happened in this area in recent times, Republicans do not deny that Protestant homes have been attacked, but they dismiss any suggestion that this is what led to the orchestrated UVF assault on the Short Strand.
Well, that was a fallacy. Look, these attacks were low level, what we would call low level. I have a mire in the Springfield Road. It happens every other week. In fact, a number of houses were damaged there, come back 2-3 weeks ago. And that was no pretext for any Republican or nationalist to attack a unionist or loyalist area, etc. Totally unacceptable.
Murray was once one of the most senior leaders in the IRA war and is now a prominent Sinn Féin figure. He's been in the Short Strand in recent days and believes leadership changes in the UVF and East Belfast are what's behind the recent violence.
There's been some new kids on the block, new faces have appeared, some old faces moved off the scene, some new faces come in, and since that there's been a major deterioration in relationships.
In the week of the attack on the Short Strand, the First Minister and DUP party colleagues met a loyalist delegation. In the room at Stormont Castle were Peter Robinson, Jonathan Bell, Sammy Douglas and the MP Geoffrey Donaldson. Church ministers from the Newtonards Road, Mervyn Gibson and Gary Mason, were also present, and there was a 5-member Loyalist delegation, including this man, Stephen Matthews, and the former Stormont Assembly member Billy Hutchinson. 3 other Loyalists were there, their Christian names Mark, Davy and Billy. Outside their local communities they would not be known. On the purpose of the meeting itself, the DUP argues it was important to move quickly.
If we'd left it longer, the situation may have got worse. We have a duty as public representatives to take the steps that we feel are reasonable to prevent violence and civil unrest and to tackle the problems that affect local communities. Because violence is not the answer. Politics is the answer, and we've got to be able to show that politics works. Now, how do you make politics work if you don't influence those who see that violence is the only way?
If the Republicans were to attack a unionist area, you think Sinn Féin would be sitting down with distant Republicans, engaging with them in the aftermath of sectarian attacks like that?
So just to be clear, are you saying Peter Robinson shouldn't have had that meeting?
From my own personal point of view, he should not have, because for me, that was sending out all the wrong signals.
The only purpose of our meeting with the UVF leadership from East Belfast was to ensure that the violence in that area stopped immediately. And we achieved that objective, and surely that is something that would be welcomed.
Quietly and speaking anonymously, there are senior Loyalists who are also critical of the meeting. But others from outside that community and outside the Stormont meeting room understand why it had to happen and why the First Minister was involved.
First of all, he wanted to, I would imagine, to do as much as possible to stop that violence. Calm it down. And you know, he will know as well as the rest of us that that is a short-term fix in it, and he will be very much aware that there is a time to meet and there's a time not to meet, and he may not decide to meet the next time round.
I think all of us have been through a process where we discovered we would have to talk to people who were involved in violence. But a decade and a half, nearly 2 decades on, it does seem to me important that we don't give credibility to people who keep claiming a political cause which no longer exists. So I don't think it's an easy question, and I wouldn't be critical of people, but I do think all of us need to think carefully about how far we move to assist people when they maybe don't want very much assistance to give up their criminal activities.
What happened here a couple of weeks ago was not just about the UVF. In response to the attack on the Short Strand, shots were fired from the Republican side of the lines, and a teenager and a man were wounded.
Have you any sense that those shots were fired by mainstream Republicans, by the IRA?
Definitely no mainstream Republicans were involved in any shooting attacks. They've condemned it. The last thing we wanted to see the guns coming back out onto the streets again. Doesn't solve the problems.
But not everyone condemns the shootings. Martin Meehan, who's part of the group Republican Network for Unity, was in the Short Strand during 2 nights of violence.
Myself, you know, everybody has a right to defend their community.
It's something you understand, is what you're saying?
Totally understand.
But was this man from North Belfast made welcome in the Short Strand by mainstream Republicans and former senior IRA figures?
Well, to me personally, I was called everything under the sun, but the issue wasn't me. The issue wasn't the senior professionals. The issue was the Short Strand community being under a sustained and vicious attack.
And
so that's, as far as I was concerned, that's all that mattered, nothing else.
And did you stay or go?
Oh no, we stayed. We stayed. For 2 nights we stayed.
How difficult is it then for mainstream Republicans to keep the lid on things when there are others who want to step into these situations, maybe presenting themselves as defenders of the community, maybe just exploiting a situation?
Well, you painted the context well. Mainstream Republicans will give leadership. They will create a presence in areas like this, and that is you know, admired by people in the area, and they respond to that very positively. We've seen an example of that tonight. The danger is this could create a pretext for people who I would describe as anti-peace process elements, who would come in and try and present themselves as defenders of the area, but they have nothing to offer this community or communities like this.
2 weeks on from the events in East Belfast, there are big questions. Questions about the intelligence gap, about why there was no information on what the UVF planned. Then there's the issue of the leaders who pulled the strings in this riotous playground. This is not just about the UVF in East Belfast, it goes wider in that organisation. There's also the question of how the ceasefire is assessed and what the NIO now thinks. And there's the issue of the UVF itself. its so-called exit committee was meeting again this week. To do what? To discuss again what has been discussed many times before. How you finally get this organisation off the stage.
Most of what is going on is criminality. Most of what is going on is about thuggery, about intimidation, about fear. I don't see any good side to what's going on, and I want the people at Stormont to represent us, and I guess most people in East Belfast want the same thing. They certainly don't want people in masks and gloves representing them.
The UVF, that exit committee, needs to think about being believed and believable. How many times does this organisation want to go away? Brian Rowan, UTV Live Tonight.